Hi friends, let's talk about what happens to your body when you have zero food for 40 days. Some call that fasting, some call that starving. It depends on how you look at it. The irony is that our food is so ultra processed these days that even if you think you're eating, you are unintentionally fasting from essential micronutrients that have no calories. But even missing one of them can make your body really, really sick. And despite the fact that we have had data for decades that the majority of Americans are deficient in one or more essential micronutrients, there's still no plan to address them. And yet fasting is getting even more popular to help lose weight and reset your body's metabolism. However, most people only see that they're losing body fat and they don't realize what they're really losing, what's missing and going away in vital organs, and how they're taxing their body and what's happening to your mind and your brain. So is fasting really even safe? Even though fasting has been practiced for many cultures and many religions for decades, long before the internet existed. Most historical fasting traditions have limits. They're supervised and there are exemptions, even when they are spiritually intense. And believe me, it can get pretty intense. The longest documented fasting program lasted 382 days of zero food, 0 calories. And yes, the person did survive. And influencers use him as an example to say fasting is safe. But they left out vital information that he was medically supervised. And exactly what happened to him afterwards, you'll find very interesting. And for decades, medical doctors have used medically supervised fasting to help people lose weight, to reverse diabetes, and to lower blood pressure. However, the outcomes weren't always so good. And we're going to talk about what really happens when you go on a prolonged fast. The real question is, are you doing it right? And do the benefits outweigh the risks? How long do those benefits actually last? What else changes in your body and brain that people aren't telling you? And will fasting improve or reduce your longevity? So the question really isn't whether or not fasting has health benefits. We know it does. By the end of this video, you will have a completely different viewpoint of fasting. To understand fasting, we have to better define common terms like prolonged fasting, intermittent fasting, and time-restricted eating, which are 3 strategies that get all lumped together as fasting, even though they each behave very differently in your body. Now, in time-restricted eating, you eat every single day just within a narrow window, like 8 to 12 hours, and then you're not eating for the other time in a 24 hours. In intermittent fasting, you alternate normal eating days with lower calorie or no calorie days, like 5 to 2, or alternate day. Every other day you eat and then you have a lower calorie or you're not eating. And for prolonged fasting, you go beyond roughly a full 24 hours without meaningful calories and you keep it going for multiple days. And the easiest way to remember the difference is time-restricted eating mostly is a mealtime intervention. Intermittent fasting is a pattern of eating and not eating across a week. And prolonged fasting is a true metabolic state change that increasingly shifts your fuel use, hormones, and tissue priorities the longer you stay in it. Now, within the first 24 hours, most of what changes is fuel access and your insulin signaling. So after your very last meal, insulin trends down and then glucagon trends up. So insulin is really your fat storage hormone and glucagon is a hormone that tells you to release fat. Then your liver starts releasing stored glucose or glycogen to keep your blood sugar stable. And sugar in the form of glucose is an essential nutrient that you always have to have in your body. Your body makes it because it's so essential that you wouldn't survive without it. So in other words, your body ramps up fat as well as protein breakdown to supply energy between meals. So if you're doing time-restricted eating, you're living in between meals. Your biology more often will give you lower than average insulin exposure, fewer insulin spikes, and if your food quality and total intake align, then you will store less fat and more of your own body fat is used. But that's not always true depending on what you're eating. But under 24 hours, you're usually not in the deep ketosis yet and you're not living off your body fat in the way that people imagine. So once you push past 24 hours, the body's priorities, it starts to reorganize. Your liver glycogen at that that point is already low. So then that ramps up your ketone production from fat. Insulin will stay low for longer stretches because then you're not eating carbohydrates. And the body leans more heavily on your own body fat as a dominant fuel because your muscles and your brain constantly needs energy. I mean, think about how you move. If your muscles stop moving, your body won't move. So it has to have energy to move. And if your brain shuts off, your whole body won't be alive, right? So you have to give it a constant supply of glucose to your brain. That's not an option. So this is where prolonged fasting can look powerful on a scale because you're burning fat, but it also becomes higher stakes. You're also missing electrolyte. You're peeing it out. You're losing it in sweat. You're losing it when you poop. You're missing micronutrients, and your body's lean mass, protein, the amino acids, a muscle that protects you. You're going to start sacrificing that. And so that means any kind of maintenance is going to be sacrificed to meet your essential needs. Ever heard about Dr. Bruce Ames' triage theory? The theory says that when you don't get enough vitamins and minerals, these essential nutrients, your body triages their use, just like an emergency room. So these nutrients get first diverted to short-term survival functions, right? Things that keep the light on. While processes tied to long-term health, repair, and disease prevention, well, basically they're quietly deprioritized, right? How many put yourself last when it comes to taking care of things, right? So in practical terms, this means that mild or moderate micronutrient deficiencies, you oftentimes don't feel sick, not right away. And if you're running on low, like on a nutrient like magnesium, vitamin K, selenium, or certain B vitamins, your body will still keep critical systems running, ATP production, basic brain functions, your heart beating, your blood glucose at a certain level, but it's going to start cutting back on things like DNA repair that prevents cancer, antioxidant defense that supports your cells to be alive, mitochondria maintenance that support energy production, immune surveillance that's basically guarding everything, and proper protein folding. So you survive today, but you accumulate damage over years. And so Dr. Ames' theory explains many reasons why chronic diseases like cancer, neurodegenerative diseases, cardiovascular diseases, accelerated aging can all develop decades after inadequate nutrition begins. And this damage, it's not dramatic or immediate. It's cumulative. For example, some enzymes that prevent oxidative DNA damage, they actually require micronutrients as cofactors. And if those nutrients are marginally low, then your DNA repair slows just enough to increase mutation risk over time. And this is done without triggering any obvious deficiency symptoms until you get so low. That's when you see it. And during prolonged calorie restriction, like fasting, appetite suppression, whether that's intentional or medication induced, the risk isn't just with low calories. It's those micronutrients that you're putting on the table to prevent future problems. Now, if essential vitamins and minerals aren't adequately supplied, your body, it's going to preserve energy production at the expense of muscle maintenance, at the expense of your immune surveillance, at the expense of repairing tissue, especially your nerves. And that is why when weight loss ignores nutrient density, you can paradoxically accelerate aging and functional decline and promote chronic diseases. So how you choose to lose weight is super important because when your body is fasting, you're going to try to conserve protein. But at the end of the day, you still need amino acids to perform essential functions that's not your muscle. And if you prolong the fast without enough reserves, without adequate electrolytes and careful monitoring, you can accelerate muscle loss and create dangerous deficiencies. So this is where Dr. Ancel Keys' work gave the world a very clear picture of what happens to the human body during a prolonged food restriction. So remember World War II? During that time, Dr. Keys actually worked for the US military on field food rations. So he made sure World War II soldiers had adequate calories and micronutrients so that they could perform. And he invented K rations for mobile troops while also leading the infamous Minnesota starvation experiment at the University of Minnesota to understand famine. So he induced famine-like, semi-starvation-like states in people, and then he refed them. And this was all done medically supervised. Believe it or not, when someone has a prolonged starvation period, if we don't give them certain essential vitamins first, they actually may not survive their first meal. So if you haven't already figured out, our medical system was developed to support our military. And hence, there's a lot of medical data collected on soldiers. Essentially, physicians and surgeons, we've been trained in the military model, which we have boot camp, that's called internship and residency, where we have sleep deprivation, where we go hungry, where we become so uncomfortable physically that we're trained to put ourselves last so that we can perform at the level of work expected of us so we can graduate. And then we climb up the ranks during boot camp to become residents, and we supervise interns and perpetuate this really pathological way to, interact with people. And ultimately, we graduate as attendings. And our war zone is a hospital. And if you've ever worked in 2020 and 2021, you know what it means to be in a war zone. And that's a whole different video. But the point is, 36 healthy men who objected to going to combat for World War II, they decided to volunteer for the Minnesota Starvation study to be essentially starved just because they didn't want to go in combat. And at that time, a draft was mandatory. So they had a 12-week control phase and then about 24 weeks of severe calorie restriction, roughly halving their intake, followed by a structured rehabilitation phase. And their point wasn't weight loss. These people didn't need to lose weight. It was just to learn what happens when people are chronically underfed and then to test what actually restores their function. And the outcomes surprised everybody. So during this starvation period, those men had profound food obsessions. They had mood changes, they had reduced energy, and they had clear physiological decline. Exactly the kind of metabolic disease the body mounts when it senses scarcity. And now we're wondering what fasting does to a body when they've already worked out this data quite a long time ago. So eventually, fasting is going to have to end, right? If you want to survive. And now you understand why you eat more and you gain more weight, even though you fasted. And most people fast because they want to lose weight. But if you do it wrong, you gain it all back afterward.
Hi, friends. I am so thrilled that you want to take charge of your health and take charge of your food. Now, I know nutrition can be complex, but it doesn't have to be. And I'm here to support you in this lifelong journey. So if you point your camera app to this QR code, it'll take you to a link for a free handout that I created just for you. And if you like it, if you want to see other handouts, please go to the link in my show notes and then you can leave me your feedback on what I could do to help you in your journey. Okay, back to the video now.
And this brings us to the case of Angus Barbary, a person in Scotland who fasted for 382 days from 1965 to 1966. Now, he did it under medical supervision too. He mostly just stayed at home and he just made day trips to the hospital to get monitored. He wanted to lose weight, so he lost 276 pounds. He went from 456 to 180. And the medical reports, it describes his fast as having extremely low blood glucose. And the key points, though, is that his mineral content, his plasma potassium eventually went down and they had to supplement. That is not compatible with life if you don't supplement. But his plasma magnesium ran low consistently from the first month and onward. I don't think they supplemented him with that. And later on, he had an increased urinary loss of cations and phosphate. And the authors who wrote the paper interpreted it as tissue breakdown. This matters because you're having tissue breakdown, hidden costs of prolonged fasting. And the scale can be falling, right? While essential minerals, they drift into the danger zone. They're falling too. And you won't feel it until your body forces you to. Now, the good news is that Angus, he survived and was able to maintain a normal body weight for the rest of his life. However, his life was pretty short. He only survived 25 years later. And he died by 1990 after a short illness. I think he lived to about 50. And this is where Dr. Bruce Ames's triage theory comes into place. He had sacrificed his body, his magnesium stores in his bone. And therefore, you're running on so low that you're less resilient against life stressors. And let me give you another example of how fasting can actually reverse chronic diseases and reset your metabolism. Ever heard of Dr. Walter Kepner of Duke University? Now, he invented the rice diet, which is different from fasting. These people still ate some, but it was the extreme. So this was around 1940s, before blood pressure drugs were on the market. And Dr. Kepner, what he did was he gave people ultra low sodium diets, very low fat and protein diets, like he fed them rice and fruit and juices, but he supplemented with vitamins and minerals, and he got people to lower their blood pressure, to treat obesity, improve their kidney function, improve their diabetes and heart failure. And he treated tens of thousands of people. And he showed that with very low sodium and calorie control, that he could drive meaningful blood pressure and weight changes and even cure severe hypertension, improve survival compared to not having any treatment. And that was, during the time in which we didn't have this explosion of drugs. And that was also the time when FDR passed from a massive stroke due to massive high blood pressure, right? So the country was scared and they wanted answers. But Dr. Kepner's work was also controversial, and it reinforces the core warning that extreme restriction, whether it's fasting or dieting, that there's always going to be trade-offs. If your protein is too low for too long, you lose lean muscle mass. If your micronutrients aren't all covered, if the deficiency rises and you don't recognize it and you're not checking it, you can have eventual symptoms. And you can even have a rebound phenomenon where the metabolic set point becomes different. And this is actually real. It's not just theoretical. The body just doesn't passively accept weight loss. It actually adapts. Ever heard of The Biggest Loser? It was a TV show that recruited massively morbidly obese people and put them on a severe calorie restriction and exercise program in which the contestants lost over 100 pounds. But the problem is they couldn't keep it off. After the show, contestants of The Biggest Loser started to gain weight, even more weight. And they measured their resting metabolic rate and body composition at baseline and 30 weeks later after that extreme weight loss, and then again 6 years later. And the researchers found that their metabolism adapted to a new resting metabolism and it stayed lower than they originally started several years ago. So when your metabolism slows down, you regain the weight even quicker, eating the same amount of calories. And this can explain why people regain their weight when calories go back up, right? They are not eating less, they're eating more, and their metabolism resets. It feels like a trap. When you calorically restrict aggressive enough, your brain and your body responds. It craves for more food, yet it lowers the amount of energy you're willing to expend. So it increases hunger signals and it makes your maintenance of your weight even harder. So now that brings us to today, how we all have different ways to advocate for calorie restriction and weight loss. And I've explained what happens with fasting when you avoid food. And this is also true whether you electively choose to avoid food or you're taking a medication like a GLP-1 agonist to metabolically make you think you want to avoid food. GLP-1 medications suppresses your appetite, it reduces your caloric intake, and it improves your blood sugar control for many people because they stop eating the junk food. Now, of course, this can be life-changing for some because it controls how much you eat. The problem is, with this rapid weight loss, no matter how you achieve it, you're always going to lose muscle mass. And this happens even when you receive GLP-1 therapy. There are no exceptions. Despite concerns that you're losing protein mass, you're still losing fat mass. And apparently that's good enough for people to want to use it. But now we're seeing a wave of new research on really emphasizing quality of weight loss to try to preserve your muscle while reducing your fat, right? Because losing weight will prematurely lose your ability to move, lose your exercise tolerance, remove that metabolic barrier, and you'll have a new set point. Now, what I've been talking about is mostly medically supervised fasting, which doesn't happen if you're just fasting on your own, like a 36-year-old gentleman who decided to fast for 40 days. And the only reason that he's around today and that we know about his fast is because his companion brought him to the emergency room after he was acting kind of funny. He apparently was confused and forgetting things a couple days before he showed up to the emergency room. However, he was having symptoms for at least a week, a double vision, and the inability to walk. And you would think that he would have done something the week prior, but that's the thing. He was so deficient that he became confused and he couldn't make rational decisions. He took fasting so seriously that he would only drink water. He didn't even supplement. And he stopped all foods, he stopped alcohol, smoking, and drugs. And when they asked him questions, the only thing he noticed was that he was peeing less. Now, if he didn't even notice he couldn't walk, I doubt he would notice anything else, right? And to clarify, I don't know this person. He's actually a case study written up publicly. And in the emergency room, they diagnosed him with a 6th nerve palsy. That means he could not move his eye away from his nose. And so most likely one eye was looking in, drifting inward, and giving him double vision. Now he also couldn't walk straight and he was terribly confused. So it sounds pretty classic of a stroke. So he got an MRI of the brain, which revealed that certain parts of his brain was damaged, which was consistent with Wernicke's encephalopathy. This is a neurological emergency caused by thiamine vitamin B1 deficiency for your brain energy metabolism. Now, the body can't really store thiamine, which is essential really for both glucose and fat metabolism in all your cells. And the more active you are, the more carbs you're going to eat, the more thiamine you're going to need. So thiamine deficiency has plagued humanity for eons and in modern times ravaged Asia, including the Japanese army during World War II. This is the very first nutrient that goes empty in you when you stop eating food. And some foods even have enzymes that break down thiamine faster so that you get to bottom even quicker. Now, despite the fact that America fortifies its grains, some people even think that we have subclinical inadequacy of thiamine because we're eating so many processed carbohydrates that don't have thiamine. But that man was kind of lucky. He was treated with high-dose intravenous thiamine, which led to a rapid neurological improvement. However, he actually got refeeding syndrome, where he had dangerously low phosphate, potassium, and magnesium levels. And this highlights that the danger does not end when the fasting just stops. It had to correct his electrolytes, slowly introduce feeding and rehabilitation. And unfortunately, he's several weeks to recover, and he still had mild, persistent symptoms after that. Now, prolonged fasting, especially without supplements or medical oversight, can cause irreversible brain injury, folks, even in the young. That man was 36, even if you're healthy. And really, there's no reason to fast for weight loss. There's such better ways to lose weight, activate autophagy, and keep your weight off. And if you want to learn more about that, watch the next video.